This is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. We're here on the beach in Anarchapulco, and I have Jack Blaylock here. He's actually lived in Indonesia for 30 years. He's originally from the US, and he came here to visit Acapulco, and he's an anarchist. So we thought we'd find out what's going on. And so Jack, how did you become an anarchist?
Well, it was a slow progress, Jeff. When I was a teenager, I was very interested in the mysteries of life. I was interested in meditation, yoga, spirituality, mysticism. I studied those things. I still do to this day. But what I found lacking in those spiritual philosophies was an idea for a way to govern ourselves that made sense to me, that was in harmony with the spiritual ideas and principles that I had started to believe in. And I just couldn't find anything. And for most of my life, I've been confused politically. Am I of this political party or that political party? Am I a Democrat or a Republican? A few years ago, I read a little bit about anarcho-capitalism, and I thought, these guys are out of their bloody minds. Basically, what you're saying is to have no government at all. That was never even on my list of choices. But I started reading some of the things that you wrote at first, and that led me to the other greats, you know, Robert Murphy and Stephen Molyneux.
Molyneux?
Yeah, Molyneux. David Friedman, guys like that. And the more I read about the idea, the more of an inner turmoil I went through. But I came out of it at the end, realizing that this is the only idea of how to manage ourselves as a species that is in complete harmony with the spiritual principles I believe in. Nothing else does it.
Did you come upon those spiritual principles from living in Indonesia, or did you already start developing those when you were growing up in Hawaii?
I started those when I was growing up in Hawaii. I read books on Hawaiian traditional spiritual beliefs. A very influential book in my life was a book called Autobiography of a Yogi. I read metaphysics. I practiced and tried to do meditation. It was before I left for Indonesia, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's funny because I had an interview probably about a year ago, right here, just a few feet away, with Luke Crowley, and he's from New York, and he had a similar sort of story to you in that when he first started reading some stuff I was saying or listening to things I was saying, he like hated me, and you were saying that you kind of had that a little bit too. You're like, you had this sort of, I really ground on you a little bit, and you had to, you know.
I had a love-hate relationship with the things you wrote for quite some time, because the idea that we don't need an elite group of other humans protecting us is the scariest thing. We just can't. We already don't trust our governments, and we don't trust our fellow man. To think that we should just throw that mistrust out the window and start just trusting everybody that is going to do the right thing when they have complete freedom.
Well, of course, people aren't always going to do the right thing, but having a certain group of people, if people's issue is that all people are generally bad or anything along those lines, so then they come up with the idea, well, so we'll just elect or we'll vote for some people, and they'll lead us, but they're the same people that we're saying are bad. So it's funny because it is a little bit of a leap to sort of say, just let things happen as they will. But as you know, and you've looked into this now, it is the best way for people to have relationships with each other non-violently. Of course,
Sure.
Anything to do with government is violence at its core. Right. Otherwise, it wouldn't be government. And you live in Indonesia, so you've been telling me numerous stories about how life is there, and it is very anarchic.
Oh yeah, in many ways. There is a government, of course. There's a police force. There's a judicial system, and so on. But day-to-day life there is anarchic in many ways. I think I gave you the other day the example of getting in a car accident. When we get in a car accident in Hawaii, where I'm originally from, the first thing that goes through your mind is, uh-oh, are my papers in order? And then the second thing is, we better call the cops. And the third,
the government.
Or the government, yeah.
Well, that's the cops.
That's the cops, yeah.
We better call the government.
We got to call government representatives and hand this problem over to them. And hopefully we have a government that works efficiently and fairly enough so that there will be a fair outcome. But the minute we do that, that takes the responsibility of solving this problem off of ourselves and puts it upon another group of human beings. And it's a way of shirking our responsibility. And all we learn from that is how to pass our problem along to another person.
Who has no real interest in the problem itself. So what I find with government solutions is they take the humanity out of every situation. So you were pointing out in Indonesia, if you have a car accident, that people actually talk to each other and they sort of discuss who was in the wrong. And maybe they do have to ask someone who was standing on the side of the road, what did you see?
Yes.
They have to sort it out for themselves.
They have to sort it out for themselves. And as you say, sometimes they're able to do it one-to-one. Other times they might need witnesses. And so they'll call the passers-by who voluntarily do that because they would like for other people to voluntarily be their witness when it happens to them. Now, I've witnessed, in the 30 years I've been living in Indonesia, I've witnessed a great many traffic accidents like that. And I have never seen one that did not resolve itself in a way that both parties were amenable and agreeable to the resolution.
It's very similar here in Acapulco. I've only seen a couple car accidents, and you know, in the U.S. or in the Western world, because the government has taken away the humanity so much away from people and taken that out of their lives, people don't know how to interact anymore. So if you have a car accident in the U.S., everyone all of a sudden is very, alarmed. Everyone's on their phones and calling the government and things like that. They don't even talk to each other. Mm-hmm. Whereas here, I've seen a few, and usually people get out, they talk. Usually they're laughing, or of course, if it was a really bad car accident, no one's laughing. But the car accidents I've seen haven't been too bad. And they just work it out amongst themselves, and it's so much better. And one example I like to give that's similar is my mother in Canada. I went up, and this is how the state and it affects people. So I went up to visit her, and she lives in an apartment complex. And I was sitting there, and I could hear this small little dog next door just yapping. And she goes, "That dog's driving me crazy. All day, all night he's yapping." And she goes, "I think I'm going to call the town council." And I just looked at her. I said, "Why don't you go talk to your neighbor?" And just, your dog is yapping a lot. Maybe there's something can we do something about this? Perhaps, I'd even be open to, I'd pay $30 to send it to dog school or something, to train it a little bit or something, just work it out amongst each other. But in the West now, so much is just taken away so that it's just lawsuits and things get filed and people with guns show up, and it rarely resolves itself very well.
It rarely does. And I think the real question that people will ask is, I think the analogy we just gave of the dog barking in the car accident, I think the average person can hear that and think to themselves, well, yeah, okay, that makes sense, I could do that. But the question is, can we take that principle and apply it to much bigger issues on a global scale, to deal with natural resources, oceans, the environment, how to govern large groups of people, and to manage ourselves. Sure, a person might say to you, oh, that works fine with a little fender bender. But what about some sort of bigger dispute involving a great deal more resources and wealth and people? Will it work on that scale? And coming to anarcho-capitalism is that journey. of coming to, yeah, it does work on a small scale, and slowly realizing it is the only way it's ever going to effectively work on a big scale.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, it's interesting. One point you brought up with me the other night was how you sort of came to this from the liberals, what they call the liberals sort of angle in the U.S. More sort of what people would call hippie sort of energy and that sort of
Yes.
stuff, the way that those people sort of talk. And there's actually so many hippies joining the anarchist movement now. And I've said this a few times. I'm going to Porkfest next week. And I was amazed how many hippies are there. I went to they had the fire and they had like drum circles and they're all playing hacky sack. And I started talking to a few of them and I said, no, gracias.
No,
and there's a free market entrepreneur here.
Yeah, here we are.
And so hacemos un video aquí, perdón. Gracias.
Gracias.
We worked that out free market style. He had some peanuts to sell and we didn't need any. And
We didn't need any.
that worked out just fine.
Yep.
And yeah, the hippies were all like, yeah, man, like, I realized one day, you know, we don't need, you know, the non-aggression principle. I'm all about love and peace, man. And so the hippies are really turning on to it. And I think that the more that we can spread this message to those sort of people, those people who feel that way,
Yes.
it can really catch on with them greatly.
Yes.
Because if anything, really, they're talking about love and peace, and that's what we're trying to say is to
Yes.
never use aggression against others, which is what government is.
Exactly. That says in a different way exactly what I was saying earlier. I am from that love and peace subculture. Most of my life, I've talked like them. I still do. And I noticed right away with the anarcho-capitalist movement is that many of the anarcho-capitalist writers and proponents are using a vocabulary that doesn't speak to that subculture very well. They want to hear, you know, their values are sustainability, love, caring for the environment, healing the planet, consciousness, growing more aware of the needs of your fellow man and of who you are, and self-development, that sort of vocabulary. And I think that that subculture, were they to truly understand what anarcho-capitalism really means, rather than their knee-jerk reaction to hearing the word anarchy, oh, you know, that means chaos. Capitalism, oh my God, you know, you're not suggesting that a group of evil, rich, greedy bastards take control, are you? Once you get them past that, and they actually understand the principles behind it, I think that they will find it is the most sensible, efficient way to attain sustainability, to protect the environment, to have world peace. Under an anarcho-capitalist system, world wars, or war period, is virtually impossible.
Yeah, and war has caused more damage to this planet than anything. The amount of nuclear bombs set off just in testing alone is ridiculous.
Yes.
The U.S. Navy, the U.S. military uses more oil than any other entity on Earth. And so, yeah, there's so many of that. So a lot of sort of environmentalist types who are also along the lines of that sort of thinking should be really into this sort of stuff because it works better than any sort of status system.
Of course, of course. You know, for example, this group that I'm coming from is very concerned about the environment. And there's a lot of talk about sustainability. Well, key to sustainability is efficient use of resources. You use just as much as you need and no more than you need. But as you know, we can come up with hundreds of examples of how the most wasteful, inefficient users of resources are governments. Private enterprise always uses resources as efficiently as possible because it is in their own self-interest to do that.
Right, because they want to make a profit.
They want to make a profit.
And profit is not a bad thing. Profit means you're creating wealth. It also is the market telling you that you're providing something that the market wants.
Yes.
And so if you're providing something the market doesn't want, you go out of business. And that's good because you were wasting resources
Exactly.
that could have been used for something else.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Exactly.
yeah, it's there's a lot more that could be said to this sort of market, and I'm sure that we'll be trying more and more to get that sort of out to them. The one thing I want to bring up is you've lived in Indonesia for 30 years.
Yes.
You're part of the Dollar Vigilante groups, which is TDV groups.
Yes.
We've got groups around the world.
Yes.
We're just about to really launch it as sort of a public, sort of, not a public, but like let people know about it. And so we're expecting a lot of people to get into it. So for anarchists out there, almost every single person in these groups are anarchists, and they're all around the world. They're people like Jack who have gone and lived and made a life for themselves in some other culture. And you can actually go and meet these people. Jack is very open to meeting people. For example, Jeffrey Maxim, who was a past guest on Anarchast, and I should update you on that. He was the 15-year-old who dropped out of school. He's essentially unschooling himself. He's been traveling through Mexico for the last few months. You met him, Jack. Interesting young man. And he's working and doing all kinds of things. He's an amazing guy. So he's been doing that, and you said to him, if you want to come to Indonesia, I'll definitely meet up with you. And
I meant it. I want to say to your audience that they can find me by going to the TDV website. I'm there under TDV groups. Look me up under Bali, Indonesia. I've been in Bali for 30 years. I know the culture very well. I'm very integrated. I speak the language. You can post me a message there on the, there's a means by which you can do that. You can contact me through the TDV Bali page. And I'm happy to be of help. Anybody has a question, please ask.
That's great. And so that's basically it from Acapulco. What's your thoughts? Do you have any other final thoughts that you want to talk about while we're on? No. I can tell you that I have a great hope and faith in humanity, that I feel this political idea we're talking about of anarcho-capitalism might work. It's never been really given a chance. But I think the burden of proof right now should be on the statists to prove that their idea works. Prove to me that a government's going to work. How many more thousands of years do we need now of evidence? All right? You know, maybe anarcho-capitalism is never going to work. I don't know. I can't point to you to a working example in the world today. But, you know, there's a popular slogan or an idea that circulates amongst my peers, which is, if something isn't working for you, let it go. We've had thousands of years of statism, and it doesn't work. Yeah, I'm of the same mindset, and it's really interesting because now we've got literally thousands of years to look at. So if you rationally, logically look at every single system that's been gone through, there's enough evidence now to show that they're not great systems. The amount of people killed by their own government in the 20th century was over 200 million people. That's quite a few people.
Right.
And that's not even including the wars. And the wars were another few hundred million. So we're talking 500 million people killed in this sort of system.
Right, and you have to think to yourself, those wars of the 20th century, it wasn't the citizens of country A all got together and decided to go to war against the citizens of country B. It was a government that decided to do that, no?
Oh yeah, of course.
Right.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's an anachronistic system, and I think we're going to move beyond it. And I think people, just videos like this really can help to spread the message and make some changes.
Yeah, I hope so.
I think it's happening. We're seeing governments just collapsing all over the world right now. This system's coming to an end. And a big part of it is the internet. People have access to this information. So like what you were saying, before you heard about this, and you heard about it through the internet, you had no idea about what we are talking about today, right?
No. And I have to say, it took me, as I said in the beginning, it took me some time to come around to it. Because all these questions go through your head. Oh my God, what if somebody robs me? What's going to happen? Or who's going to build the roads? You know, how could I possibly live without something to rely on? And I found that all of the common objections to anarcho-capitalism, you know, what are we going to do about a police force? What are we going to do about fixing the sewage systems, and et cetera, et cetera? There are answers to every one of those objections. And the best way to hear those answers is to read the anarcho-capitalist writers. Jeff here is a good writer. There's Murray Rothbard. There's David Friedman.
Walter Block, who was on Anarchast, he wrote about privatizing the roads, how much better it works when the government's not involved with the roads. Yeah, there's a lot of, and this is another thing, is a lot of the literature, a lot of the thinking has gone on over the last few decades, and a lot of it sort of started with Murray Rothbard in one way or another. And we've just been building up these works of actually people studying each case, and it's pretty, the proof is right there in front of your eyes that it always works better when government's not involved. And what government is centralization. And if you ask most people, and most people, not all people, and you say, what do you think about communism? They'll say, that's terrible. It's all centrally planned. Well, that's what government is central planning. Yes. And when you allow individuals to plan their own lives, it is a chaos, but it's an organized chaos that works out much better.
Yes.
But you have to have a little bit of faith in your fellow man but I think there's so much evidence now. People in the U.S. just constantly being attacked by the police. They're never being actually helped by the police. It's very rare.
That's a very good example. I notice that when I go to a shopping mall, there's security guards there protecting that shopping mall. And so far, my experience with shopping mall security guards have been pretty good. I've never seen a case of security guard brutality.
That's right. It always works better when there's a profit incentive, because if the security guard is going around hassling people in the mall all the time, he'll get fired.
And nobody, or nobody would come to the mall, one or the other.
One or the other. So either way it ends. With public policing, it just goes on and on and on, and it never ends. They actually have the opposite incentive of the private market. So when you're a centrally planned, like a public police force, your actual goal is to grow the size of your police force as big as possible, because then you get bigger budgets. Right. Whereas a private company wants to keep it as small as possible, the most efficient as possible, so that they have a profit. Yes. So, yeah, so we should end this conversation. I'd like to thank you very much, Jack. And very interesting stuff, and definitely if you're in Indonesia, check Jack out, and I'm going to try to do that. Bali's a great place, and if you're down in Acapulco, always let us know, or anywhere around the world almost. We've got anarchists and TDB people now, so that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy. Cheers.
This is Anarchast.